So what I'm going to do today is talk for a little while about really two or three things which are of interest to me I'm a sociologist. I'm sorry, there's just nothing I can do about that. I'm into sociology and cultural studies, that's what I'm interested in. And I'm going to just say a few things today about quite a large-scale research project that I will be applying for money for in December, which is a project that tries to look into some of the sort of consequences of globalization for Poland and Polish people, the Polish society and Polish people. I will tell you in much more detail what I mean about this in a second. So I'm going to just relate this to one of my other main interests, because one of the things that I'm very interested in is the sociology of sport, an increasingly respectable academic discipline. And in the case of football, a very important one, since it seems clear now that football and the global diffusion of football is a very, very important element of the emergence of global culture. So I want to put these two things together. Thank you very much. And in doing so, I want to look at some of in the case of the very famous BBC Panorama hatchet job, assassination of Poland a few weeks ago, just before the thing started, to look at some of the kind of stereotypes which you all know very well, stereotypes about Polish people that are in operation within Britain, and connect these to some of the broader sociological things that I'm interested in. So, if anybody saw that very famous documentary in which Sol Campbell said, well, he said this, didn't he? He said that, don't go there, you may be coming home in a coffin. One of the most insane public comments of recent years, I think, but still, it shows us something quite important, I think. It shows us the way in which this part of the world, Poland, Ukraine, can still be, or is still often seen as a kind of dark, backward, rather menacing and dangerous place, to which normal people and their families cannot really safely expect to come home from which they can expect. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and I want to connect it up with something else, which is, it seems to me that one of the things that is happening in globalization is certain sets of values, certain principles, certain philosophy is going along with the globalization process. And one of the things that I think we just experienced in Poland was having Polish society and Polish people kind of monitored, scrutinized, assessed on the extent to which they have adopted the values of globalization when it comes to, I will say more about this as well. So these are the things that I will discuss. We'll talk about the good old BBC, which is now a much more controversial institution than it was 30 or 40 years ago within Britain, I think it is fair to say. We'll talk about the tournament that's just finished here. And we'll talk about football's role in globalisation, which I think is a very important one. And I hope to demonstrate or make this case to you and have a discussion afterwards. So I will speak for about 30 minutes or something like this. So here are our themes. The project that I'm trying to set up with a couple of colleagues at Jagiellonian is to look at some of the consequences for people, for kind of lived everyday life, lived experience of globalization as a complex set of processes. For Poland, for Polish society and for Polish people. I don't know the answers to these questions, but I plan to sort of propose a discussion on an analysis of it. So plenty of people are writing things about how the economy is changing, perhaps about how the social structure might be changing, various things, but not enough people, in my view, are doing the kind of ethnographic, qualitative work that I am interested in, which looks at how these changes affect us as people in our daily lives. So that is what I propose to try and do by talking to a lot of people like yourselves, to talking to people who now live in this kind of bi-social, bi-cultural world, what effect it has on people, for better or worse, and what effect in the longer term it might have for each of our societies. So that's the general framework of what that I'm interested in. And the kind of overarching concept for this is the idea of globalisation as social theorists define it in various ways. So globalisation not at the level of whether we are all eating and enjoying McDonald's now or drinking Starbucks coffee, this very superficial discussion of globalisation, but what the kind of processes of globalisation, which are probably very profound, are doing to restructure or influence or reorder the world in which we live. So I can break this down for the purposes of today's discussion into these two things. One is the new patterns of global migration in which you are all involved, kind of new forms of movement of people from more countries to more countries, and new forms of kind of globalised movement between countries and between cultures. And the other is what I thought is the most interesting thing about this football tournament that has just finished, which is to discuss and think about this football tournament as a key element of global culture now, since it is the closest thing we have. It's the closest thing we have to a global game. But if you think of football not as a game, but as a cultural form, it's the closest thing, perhaps one of the closest things we have to a kind of global cultural form, actually. So it's important for these reasons. And I will talk about some of the issues that were involved in that, as it seemed to me that what was happening while this tournament was on is not simply that Poland was hosting a football tournament, but that something was at stake. And I think it was something to do with something which has been happening gradually in the last couple of decades, but which is now becoming more prominent, which is the kind of Poland's kind of inclusion in this club of globalised culture. But I'll say more about that as well. So that is what I'll talk about. Globalisation, we could start with a quick definition of this terribly complex and hard to define thing for the sake of discussion. And I like these kinds of social theorists because they have some arguments about what we are living through now, about what globalisation actually is, which try to do much more than say, oh, we live in a postmodern world. The postmodern world, the old modern world is finished, now we live in a completely new time. These kinds of writers are trying to work out what the continuities, what the process is, whereby modernity became globalised modernity and how we come to be where we are now. Ulrich Beck and Anthony Giddens, two leading writers in all of this, call this late modernity. It is not post-modernity, it's a continuous process happening since the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. And Bauman, much more pessimistically, calls it liquid modernity. And these Beck and Giddens are very optimistic. They think that globalisation will offer us as individuals an unprecedented opportunity to fulfill ourselves, live in a creative way, have self-determination, all of this. So for them, late modernity, globalisation is a super opportunity. For Bauman and others, it's actually a catastrophe. For regular people who don't love being exposed to risk all the time, who prefer more traditional forms of culture, who don't want to become super individualised, self-created individuals, it's rather nightmarish and difficult to cope with. So I think you can have obviously very different perspectives on what is happening socially and personal level to us in a globalising world. But both of these sets of writers converge on a number of ideas. I think there are three of them here. One, globalisation means, obviously, a weakening of the authority of institutions. Of modern institutions in particular, but institutions per se. Whether it is the church, or the family, or educational institutions, or parliamentary democracy, whatever it is. The main argument is that the weakening of the authority of institutions is one of the most important two or three things that is happening, that globalisation is making happen. Second is this, that globalisation actually means, more than anything, if you don't think of globalisation as some huge force circling the world, which none of us can really understand, but think about how it comes down into everyday life, that what globalisation represents is an accelerated form of individualisation, extreme individualism, a capacity for very highly developed individualism. And Ulrich Beck, who is one of the best-known writers on all of this, he says, globalisation is just individualisation, actually. That is the core of it. How we become people who no longer live in the social roles provided by authoritative institutions. And the third thing that Beck also talks about is enforced cosmopolitanism. And this is why the football is important, I think. That in the globalised world, certainly since the war, almost everybody in a society that joins the globalised world, which I suppose is everywhere, now has to confront, or at least be aware of the idea that we share a world with people from a very large number of very diverse cultures and ethno-cultural groups, and that our awareness of others and of otherness and our inability any longer to ignore others and otherness is a key characteristic. It's supposed to enforces us all at one level to be cosmopolitans. We can either be positively cosmopolitan and think it is a great opportunity for new cultures to emerge based on mixtures, or we can be negatively cosmopolitan and just think it's a situation that demands that we somehow manage to handle our relationships with people different from ourselves without descending into violence. But I would take these three kind of ideas as important in the context of what I want to talk about when we come to football. And one other very powerful definition of globalisation, and this is what we hear from the corporations, this is what we hear from big business, it's also what we hear from many commentators, is that these new conditions, this new world, these new kinds of people, or it doesn't need new kind of people because there can be obsolete kinds of old people, but the people that will thrive in the 21st century will be like this. They will be like Davos now, or like the late departed Steve Jobs, kind of who can exemplify. It'll really be the model for this kind of person. The 21st century globalised world demands that we become more open, flexible, innovative, tolerant of risk, self-aware, self-motivating, etc., 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 etc. That we, it's obvious that not everybody wants to be like this. I don't particularly want to be like this myself, it's too much hard work. But this idea that the age of globalisation requires a new kind of set of attitudes, or orientation in the world, I think is one, at least the kind of, in the institutions that are, or corporations that are driving globalisation economically, prioritised. And Steve Jobs himself, not long before he died, I know that for many people Steve Jobs is a hero, but for me he said something that I found very alarming not long before he died. He says, "Death is great, I embrace it, because once we're dead, the dead wood gets cleared away and then the young can come with their innovative ideas and replace us. I'm happy I'm dying." This at least was his stated. It's fine, I don't mind dying, so somebody young and more innovative and more energetic than myself will replace me, and that is what is important. And I think that goes together with the downgrading of the idea of maturity, experience, and all that. But that's another thing. So that is the kind of context I would place globalisation in for our discussion. And it's worth looking at this with that in mind, because now I want to switch to looking at what is happening in kind of migration between Poland and the United Kingdom. And now, if you read the newspapers, you get one idea of what people are like, I suppose. If you talk to people, you get an idea of what people are like. But as far as I'm aware, the most sort of comprehensive, empirical, research-based analysis of what kinds of people different cultures produce, what kinds of perspectives, comes from Geert Hofstadter's cultural dimension stuff. You may or you may not know this, but it is the kind of cultural consultancy solution, to use the word, that many of the big corporations go to, and his voice, his kind of analysis, it may be good, it may be bad, but it's one that people listen to, breaks down different societies and says that different cultures will tend to produce people who have certain dispositions or ways of doing things. And it's interesting if you look at these to compare Britain and Poland with the last thing I said in mind, and then we'll move on to look at the stereotypes of Polish people in Britain. To start with, I mean, the higher the number, I've only got 3 examples here, not lots of them. He has 5 dimensions, I've got 3 of them here. The higher the number, the more likely you're, according to this, The higher the number, the more likely your culture disposes you towards something. Makes it more likely that you will have certain values. According to this, Poland has quite a high, Polish culture tends to promote or develop in people quite positive attitudes towards hierarchical institutions and hierarchies of order. Exactly the kinds of hierarchical institutions which globalization, the theorists tell us, are disappearing. The British are close to being, despite their peculiar class system, which I think is very confusing, but which is as much to do with fun and going fun than anything else. I don't think people take it terribly seriously anymore, but you might disagree. Are much less tolerant of hierarchical institutions. If you take individualism, you find the difference is much narrower. Hofstede defines Poland as an individualistic society, relative to on the whole scale of things, but not as individualistic. I mean, the British are said in this analysis to be among the most individualistic people in the world. And what I think is the third interesting one is that when it comes to what he calls uncertainty avoidance, which is really the Steve Jobs thing. Steve Jobs and Davos Man are all about being able to thrive in conditions of uncertainty, being able to handle lack of structure or weak structure and work as an individual somehow to get something out of unstructured situations, to maximize unstructured situations. And in this dimension, Hofstede has the biggest kind of gap between the British and the Polish, in which he claims that the British are quite happy, on the whole, to operate in very unstructured social and institutional situations. And he says something different about Poland. That's a very high figure of 92%. Whether or not it's true. And what is interesting about this is this could all be completely true based on perfect empirical research, or it could not. But I think that some of these characteristics are interesting for us for two reasons. One is that if they are true, it makes Poland an interesting case for the theorists of globalization, because you would expect in Polish society quite a lot of resistance to the new characteristics which globalized people are supposed to develop. And two, it's important because of this, if it's not accurate, but kind of more based on sort of stereotypical assumptions about people, that's interesting as well, because it feeds into this, I think. Everybody here, I think, knows more about this than I do, because I regularly survey British media for this stuff. And it's clear that two very sort of stereotyped ways of writing about, discussing, presenting Polish people in Britain have emerged. You might know of others, but I'm aware of two mutually exclusive or contradictory ones. One is that we find this in the Daily Mail, the Sun, we find it even in the Daily Telegraph, the upscale, respectable newspapers of a conservative disposition, who are always telling us that Polish people are in Britain to take our jobs, scrounge our dull money. What else are they doing? They're kind of rough. They are socially liberal. They are not as sophisticated as we are in matters of race or feminism or sexual gender politics, that kind of stuff. And one of the messages that comes through, at least to me, and some contents analysis of the British media, is that this is a very coherent and often presented narrative that Polish people are somehow backward, illiberal, and they're not really here for any good reasons. You're more familiar with this than I am. But then there is a sort of another narrative, which is also, I think, quite strong, which is that Polish people are hard-working, respect. Again, I think these are stereotypes. There's not much room for people to be individuals in either of these, but as social stereotypes or social summaries of populations, Poles are. It's good to have Poles in Britain because they are hard-working and British workers aren't. They are respectable and British people are not. They're kind of loose and drunk all the time. They are traditional and will uphold good values and structures because British people won't. 25% of British children live with one of their parents, the family is breaking down, there is no religion, etc., etc. So obviously there's a politics connected to this, but these seem to me, perhaps we can talk about it when I have finished, these seem to me to be two main sort of narratives which drive people's discussion and understanding of Polish people in Britain. Now, that's what it is. But to come on to the football now, it seems to me very clear that when the BBC made this programme about just before the tournament started, the BBC, as a very progressive, liberally minded institution, organisation, took the verse and kind of worked narrative A, what I would call narrative A, into their description of Poland, Ukraine, as a kind of in the lead up to the tournament. So let's get on to the football now. I guess everybody's seen this, and if you haven't seen this, you have heard it discussed. What I noticed is that since it was on, almost every office I go into, almost everybody I have encountered, I go to see the doctor, because I'm English. I'm getting a lot of flack for, I'm being told that the BBC has been very wicked to us. It's not my fault, of course, I don't really like the contemporary BBC, but it's a topic of conversation everywhere, I think. There and here. And if we look at this, if we actually look closely at this programme, although the worst scenes in the programme were those taking place in Ukraine, which involved actual violence, the net effect of this television programme, I think, in its presentation of this part of the world was I think that distinction was lost. And it became a presentation of that kind of dark place that used to be behind the Iron Curtain, an idea which I think is still very much in the minds of people who haven't been here. Watch the programme, it almost makes Poland and Ukraine look like Nazi Germany. The football game, there are skinhead Nazis at football games, of course there are. We're not pretending there aren't. But I think the only serious or pseudo-serious documentary that the BBC offered in the run-up to the tournament, to present this as the kind of the main image or the exemplifying image of Polish society was rather dubious. And a lot of my friends in England who haven't been here got in touch with me saying, Jesus, I never realised you poor guy. You live, it's like some kind of, it's like Weimar Germany. There's skinheads everywhere, you've got brown shirts, how do you live there? So these things have their effect. It's quite serious, I think. And a lot of my British friends have been here, and they love it, and they love it when they come. But the people who haven't been here, I think, are easily susceptible to this kind of propaganda. And so this is unpleasant anyway, I think. But because, as I will argue in a moment, being able to stage a good international football tournament is now a very important thing for a nation in a globalised world. It meant that the run-up to the tournament was something of a disaster, wasn't it? Mario Balotelli, the black players in England, saying, if anybody throws a banana skin on the field, I will walk off, all that kind of stuff. So the build-up in Britain, I think, was very much, I guess people here were there and I wasn't, was about this. And I think that I tried to watch this programme objectively as if I had never spent 10 years in Poland. And it seemed to me to draw on some very, very old and ugly stereotypes of Polish and Ukrainian people. And this is a problem because what these football tournaments are supposed to do now, World Cups and European Championships, is I think they are supposed to play a very kind of specific role in the spread of progressive ideas through globalisation. I'll come back to that. What did we have? We had Sol Campbell's remark about the coffin, which we'll come back to. And I would just want to make one point about this, because I think a lot of British people in Britain themselves are very disillusioned with the BBC anyway. So I'm sure there are people in Britain who ate up this vision of backward, dark, primitive, savage Poland. But there are also a lot of people in Britain who don't buy this idea at all, and perhaps because they've been here, or perhaps because they simply no longer trust the BBC to give them something, any kind of balanced, objective documentaries anymore. So I think this was important, and I think it was dangerous, but I don't think it was universally kind of accepted, but we'll see. So let's just see how bad Poland is. I took the trouble to transcribe the wisdom of Sol Campbell, because I think if you look at them on black and white, if you look at them on paper, it's very strong stuff. And this is the main message, as you know, that was transmitted to the British TV audience. What does he say? He said, they should say, they, the authorities, FIFA, UEFA, until we see a massive improvement on racism, on dealing with racism, until we see a massive improvement that you have sorted it out, you're never going to get this tournament. You do not deserve to have such prestigious tournaments in your country. So here's a footballer, not a social theorist, or a politician, a footballer, linking, staging Euro 2012 with the adoption of correct practices, values, and ways of doing things. Which is to say, Western European and American practices, values, and ways of doing things. Not that I'm defending anti-Semitism, but I think this is a different argument. And when he's asked whether he would recommend, right towards the end of the programme, families, the interviewer asked him to come here, he comes out with the classic lines, no chance, stay at home, watch it on TV, don't even risk it because you could end up coming back in a coffin. The England fans who went to Ukraine themselves could see how absurd this proposition was. And almost universally, from what I've seen, they had a great time in Ukraine, they liked the locals, and nobody they weren't kidnapped by gangsters or eaten by wolves or any of that kind of stuff. They were just met friendly people who wanted to, I suppose, take their money, sell them beer. But this, I think in liberal Britain, this idea that we may be coming back from this part of the world in a coffin has some weight. But I think a lot of the kind of regular people perhaps think of it differently as we see it here. So just to come on to football now, I will speak for about 10 minutes more and finish talking about football. So we're now talking about football proper, there is now some very interesting, theoretically very sophisticated, relatively sophisticated stuff has been done about football. And this is the most interesting account that I know of what the globalisation of football actually means. Roland Robertson, in the early 90s, wrote a book called Social Theory and Global Culture. And Richard Giulianotti, much more recently, 2004, wrote a book called Sport, a Critical Sociology, based on Roland Robertson. So it's it claims to be the most serious attempt to define or evaluate what football means in terms of globalisation. And what they say, I think, is quite interesting. That if you take the really high period of globalisation to begin at the end of the war, or really sort of started in the 70s or the 80s of the last century, they argue that if you look at some of the most significant developments in the development of globalisation, looking at what happens in football as the global game is a very good way of seeing it, actually. And the football, large international sporting tournaments, but large international football tournaments, most of all, can help us, they can exemplify some really important changes. One, the core argument about globalisation is that time and space becomes compressed. The world gets smaller, people are much more mobile, people are much more aware of the fact that we live on a small planet in which we are all kind of interconnected. Time and space compresses. I think these international football tournaments give us a kind of visual, a solid, actual representation of this. Why? Because these football tournaments do this, I think. According to these theorists, perhaps the most important thing about globalisation, apart from its individualisation process, is the way in which, since the Second World War, we all, as citizens of the world, have become increasingly aware of the difference, of the fact that there are 100 or 200 or 300, the enormous diversity of ethno-cultural forms and people is something which now saturates our everyday. We can't ignore it anymore, and we're aware of it all the time. Even if it isn't very close to us where we live, it's in our minds. And as a part of this, we become much more aware of other people, other nations, other cultures, and that's why I think it's worth thinking about these football tournaments, not as sporting tournaments, but as kind of tournaments or carnivals of national identities in which people kind of present their countries in the way people support their countries in certain ways, and it's a kind of a parade of national identities, isn't it? And also, at its best, and this may be changing, different nations for a time had their own styles of playing football. We think we know what Brazilians are like from the way they play football. We think we know what Germans are like from the way they play football, etc., etc. So it's actually much more than a sporting tournament. It's a global situation in which, and now that these large football tournaments get the biggest TV audiences, some of the biggest TV audiences in the world, it's actually a concrete example. It's a concrete, in-your-face manifestation of this kind of increasing awareness of difference and identity and all of that. And the other thing that happens, they say, the other big characteristic of globalization over the 20th century until now is more and more of an extension of calls for human rights, universal human rights, and social justice. This is one of the characteristics, I think, of our age. We've seen a lot of it in the last 30, 40, 50 years. And football actually plays an important role in supporting this process and, again, exemplifying it. You think about the anti-racism campaigns, the fact that sort of semi-articulate football team captains now have to read out speeches from pieces of paper telling everybody about the evils of racism and all of that kind of thing, that football becomes used as a vehicle for moral crusading and the extension of sort of social justice, which is a kind of an example of the broader process. And anybody here who is sort of old enough to remember when France won the 1998 World Cup, I was very struck then, and have been ever since, how, this was in, 98, how, just to look at the French football team, back then, so 14 years ago, something like this, this is a kind of physical, actual manifestation of what globalization. I think apart from the Olympics, apart from the Olympic opening ceremony, more people in the last 20 years have watched the World Cup final than anything else on television. And so out there in the world with its 5 or 6 billion people, for the first time perhaps, people who don't know France or haven't spent time in Western Europe get a kind of visual representation of how Europe has changed and how Europe has changed as a consequence of globalization. Something similar if you just looked at pictures of the England squad for this last tournament. Just have a quick look at that and you see that this is not the England of, the secret garden and all of that. This is a multicultural, this is a society which has been very seriously influenced by globalization. So I'll just, before I finish, I'll say a few things about this tournament which I thought were interesting. One is that. I think it's worth considering the possibility that football now, as this globally popular cultural form, represents, perhaps, it's a suggestion, like the English language, like the internet, like perhaps a few other things we might think of, a kind of a global glue. I mean, it's a cliche to say that you can go almost anywhere in the world. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. Indians' obsession with cricket means that that great country of 1.2 or 1.3 billion people is keeping outside this. So there are holdouts, but I think even in America, even in the United States, my American friends have told me that this last European tournament was much watched. It was on television at good times in the schedule, as far as they could make it. It got a lot of attention. That the American the American television companies attempt to sell football, soccer, went up another level. That more and more people, even in the United States, are becoming interested in football. And as the United States becomes more and increasingly Hispanic or Hispanicized country, we can expect that to continue, I think. So even America eventually may embrace the global game. And it's one of those things, isn't it? It's one of those things that people all over the world can very easily talk to one another about in the absence of anything else. You can talk about a small number of things that actually you can talk to anybody about. Now that 50% of the audience, the television audience for these tournaments are women, we read, I've been reading. It's no longer something that guys watch, so it's kind of, we might think of it as a sort of a global glue, which means that staging one of these tournaments is very important culturally and politically, actually, because it means that your country, if it hasn't before, is making a very big impression in its membership of this sort of club. The other thing, which I think that Polish people didn't quite, or maybe they did, or might have been surprised by the extent of it, in which having one of these football tournaments really puts your society, your values, the kind of people you are, the level of your civilization, according to Sol Campbell, under scrutiny, and that this kind of absorption into the global glue game sort of comes at the cost of kind of quite ruthless, very often ill-informed analysis of the society which is hosting the competition, which I think we just kind of saw, although it ended out much better. I've already mentioned this. And then, of course, there was Poland and Russia. And it's obvious, I think, that the really horrified response to what happened in Warsaw when the Russian fans decided to have their little nationalist march and were met by an opposing force on the bridge there, was viewed as a great catastrophe by many people here, I think. Certainly many people who are not involved in the cultural politics of this. As this is exactly what Poland didn't need. Poland is in the shop window of the world trying to demonstrate its right to be included in civilized, globalized world. And you get this kind of outbreak of really very old school violent nationalism and guys with no hair running up and down, kicking one another. Never looks good on the television. And so there was that. And I think that it makes sense that people panicked and became so anxious about that in the context that I've tried to present. And finally, I think the tournament ended very well. I think the general kind of analysis in the media and talking to people is that it's good. Most of the visitors who came to Poland for the first time liked what they saw, found the Polish people to be friendly, found that there were no polar bears raiding their bins at dawn or anything like this. That the response to it has been mostly positive, I think, and I might go as far as suggesting, I don't know if this is going too far, suggesting that this very stereotypical way of talking about Poland has still, in a country like Britain, for many people, still has Poland somehow associated with World War II or with martial law and solidarity. There's that kind of cognitive, imaginative world that Poland belongs in. But I think that this very successfully hosting this very good tournament has possibly shifted the kind of place that many people have about the imaginative map of Poland, where Poland fits into away from that somewhat and towards a kind of map of the globalised world to which Poland now belongs. Yeah, that was what I wanted to say. And we will leave it there. So I've just tried to present really two things that I'm interested in. I will have to write something about this. So we could discuss this if anybody wants to. You can attack me. You can ask me questions that I may or may not be able to answer. You can lodge any kind of observations. You can tell me whether you think this is the kind of things I am interested in here, or the way I have presented it represent a kind of credible approach to researching Polish society and changes in it, or anything else that anybody might want to talk about.
Have you found the direction of Polish model in Italia to this documentary from BBC? She had a nice T-shirt with words like BBC, and it was Ben Boy Campbell. There was one direction. And I generally think that the Polish, the image of Poland worldwide is completely false. Because in fact, Polish stands for perfect, optimistic, loving, sexy, inspiring, and enlightened.
I have an observation or a question. Why do you think the BBC made this panorama? Because I think because of the globalization and the world is getting smaller for us, we have less time. Now BBC have to do very controversial documentaries or very controversial theory about different things. And I think that's why it was, because I can't believe that these people would go to Poland, Ukraine, go to these places, and they just saw that. Because that, when you go into any country, I think that's the point of globalization, that BBC
another aspect of it is that I think it makes the kind of, this means talking about the BBC actually in the way it's changed. The old-fashioned BBC, which was there to uphold traditional British values and spread British culture, and actually uphold BBC English, that was the mission. I think the vision of the BBC has changed. It's become it's changed almost like to become its own office, where now the BBC is much more, it's run by much more liberal, globalised, left-wing kind of people, whatever. But I think that there's a big discussion in Britain now about the extent to which the kind of values that the BBC embeds in its programmes or expresses have become anti-conservative. And the BBC themselves now admit this. And I know a lot of conservatives in Britain regard the BBC as a kind of liberal propaganda machine. So I know a lot of people who are not paying their licences, their television licences anymore. My father was one. He said, I'm not paying my television licence for the BBC to promote left-wing propaganda. He was exaggerating. But there is a question about, because it is one of the most important institutions in Britain, this change in its values is actually very important. And I think this change in values can be supported by analysis. Whatever, I don't really take a position on this. But what I do notice is it tends to put a very progressive, liberal spin on in its reporting now. And one of the things that I think the BBC was doing, or the people who made the programme were doing, were contrasting kind of politically correct, liberal, multicultural, civilised Britain, and setting up Poland and Ukraine as its opposite, and saying, we have got it sorted out, we are better, we are civilised, we have the answers, we are the right thinking people. You over there, it's still left in your mind, in your back, racist world. You need to be more like us. So I think there was some kind of juxtaposition,
maybe the right background for British people.
Yeah, I think so. I think that.
And there's so many programs on the BBC which show the bad side of British society, with this drunken people everywhere, especially teenagers and single mothers just taking benefits and things like that. And they want to show that the other country are worse than they are, than British society is. And I think, but from the other side, I think that now everything was sells on BBC. Shocking programs, or antics, or I don't know.
It's done. It's very much done and more obvious.
But I'm still very grateful for BBC for programs like Blue Planet or Frozen Planet last time. A very interesting program which I think a Human Planet. That's about the humans in different planets.
Yeah, I think they still make these flagship documentaries. The mass of their programme has become much more socially downscaled.
That's what reflects the viewers. People don't expect anymore things like that. I work with the British people and they expect like X Factor or very flashy evening programs which are very basic, just show the fashion or things.
But why? I mean, it might be that the BBC once had a mission. In the old days, when Britain was a different society, had a mission to try and elevate the level of culture. And they put on programming that people were expected to make an effort to understand or rise to. But now the opposite happens. It's like a commercial channel now. It shows dumb, trash, and it's given up its mission as what is that? It's given up its mission, I think. It still makes very good programs because technically there's a lot of very skilled people there. But I think the mass of the program is, as you described, it's rubbish and so obvious. Nothing interesting.
Yeah, I just want to part of the strategy to Polish as a nation. This is a long-term planning event. You know, this has been going for a couple of years now, with the big force recently. And denial, as you mentioned, this is all done very mysteriously for many people. They don't really realize that they are a tool in England of the ruling classes. You know, they are being made to think whole dirt, which is there, the tensions, you know, which are only the beginning of what will really happen.
The beginning of a long-term social crisis, and I think the media is trying to. It would be like the Polish TV making a programme about the Olympics which should show riots on television, which is this deep social dysfunction and chaos actually in Britain.
Yes, chaos. It is a chaos.
It's chaotic society.
Degradation of society because of degradation of many values, i.e. family values, wealth ethos, you know, lowering standard of education, security of the population, you know, everything, wherever you look, it is a degradation.
I agree, and I think that the BBC, amongst other, and the political system, is invested in the idea of saying everything is fine, actually. We have a very successful, thriving, multicultural, open society. There is some admission that there are some problems now, but there is still a tendency to try to cover over that.
Brush it under the carpet.
But why Hannah was saying about Poland? Why they don't ask you about the opinion about Poland? Why the footballers have more to say than any other?
Well, he's a black footballer, which gives him a lot of authority.
Yeah, but you know, I think that in Britain, things like football or celebrity world, it means more than politicians. Nobody even, not nobody, but there's less people listen to politicians
I think the statistic is that more people vote in the elections for Big Brother, who to evict from the Big Brother house. Some years ago, the Big Brother was very popular, they voted in the general election.
That's right.
The most striking thing that I spoke to my friend from my university is like a Arab version, sala program. He's going for the PhD now, and he said that he believed basically, which what I said in that program. One of his friends is also like studying went to Poland, and he said exactly the same thing, which was that program that those things happen. This is really striking that really high educated people, they tend to leave those kind of things. They don't look like what should be.
Yes, I think this is part of the problem. I think there is a mindset now which sees what it wants to see, believes what it wants to believe. And however well educated people are, this seems to bear no resemblance to their capacity for objectively evaluating things for themselves. Honestly, I think this is a very big problem in Britain myself now.
Well, I think that education actually should open your mind, just to learn more objectively. And when I was trying to raise stuff like that, just like small percentage of the population, it's supposed to be happening.
Let me just say this. I've lived here for 10 years for a number of reasons. I have a Polish family, my wife's I'm happy here. One of the reasons I work here is when I'm working, I have freedom of speech. In Poland, I can teach more within reason, within the limits of the law. I can teach whatever I want, as long as it's proper. When I was working, my last years in British universities, I was becoming very unhappy at the kind of speech codes, the kind of conformity, the need to be agreeing with everybody else. So I think we're getting off topic here, but I think that in British academic life, in British, there is a kind of new kind of conformity and a very strong kind of closed-mindedness, which only permits some values and views and not others. It's like, I think it's like an Orwellian situation where it's the kind of the thought policing. I used to work in a university where I read, in the days when we bought newspapers, I always used to read the Daily Telegraph, which is understood as a conservative newspaper. I'm not a big conservative, but I like it because I like it sports writers. And when I walked into work, as I approached my work, I used to fold it up and put it into my bag so that none of my colleagues saw it. Now, nothing would have happened to me. I wouldn't have been sent to prison or anything. I didn't want to argue with them all day long about the newspaper I did. So you keep quiet a bit, you conform. And so there's much more conformity and much less freedom of speech in my estimation there.
Now, it's another question left.
Well, I think the British society, I know that it's not the subject, it's had this loss of class. Even when media say that there's no class in the British society, but there are so big difference between classes in society. And even things like that, buying a paper, that just shows you who you are. And it's proper to buy one paper, it depends on which kind of circle of people you're around. But, yeah.
Well, there are two things happening. On the one hand, some people say class doesn't really matter anymore. On the other hand, social mobility, the gap between middle-class people, or people with jobs, and the underclass is much wider than it probably has been for 150 years. There is no social mobility in this anymore. If you live in a poor neighbourhood and you go to a bad school, that's where you're going to stay.
It's getting worse and worse and worse, isn't it?
It is getting worse.
Yes. You know, I was running around actually, not visiting, with the last month's Open University, Open Days in Universities, Bristol, Southampton, Queen Mary, you know, the LSE, and you know, we were discussing because of my son, who is going to apply next year, and we were discussing the matter of openness, and with many academics there. They are very open-minded. They have programs, you know, but the problem is that in Britain, this open-mindedness doesn't go down, doesn't spread around in mass media. They're doing everything in order for the open-mindedness to not reach the population, to not reach the people. They want them to become as open-minded as possible. This is a problem. And BBC is a part of that net.
I think BBC is a part of this problem.
But we have nothing to say, you know, license fees, we have nothing to say. You have to pay the license, otherwise, you know.
They cancelled the license now.
Okay, we did.
What, sorry, can I ask, why did you cancel the
You
license?
cancel the license as
Because of
There's
this
a
documentary film. And by the way, it's interesting that this documentary film, when you're gonna have a look at the map, Poland is, I think, situated next to Austria, or something like this. So it becomes so absurd that at the end of the day it becomes funny. And talking about Daily Mail, there was once an article about Poles, and they were presenting Poles as the people who steal and eat swans, for example.
Yeah, they were people were kidnapping swans from the Royal Park.
Really ridiculous and funny, and I do not care about it anymore.
And each swan is considered as treason, isn't it? Because they're part of
They've got the
yes, it's a treason, yes.
But there is a positive thing after this documentary film was shown. I have made the research and I checked the opinions of the Jewish people in Poland. And all top Jewish people, like for example the major rabbin of Poland, said that it's completely disgusting, and he supported Polish nation, so it was a very positive thing.
But you will never hear this in Britain, though. I think this is... It disappeared. I mean, the programme itself has become almost true for people that subscribe to it. And the facts, or the alternative opinions, don't seem to me to have had much effect. Yeah.
But you know, for us here, because of our group, because of our tasks for the future, for us it's very important to change it, and we need to change the stereotype of the thinking. You know, that is our role here. That is, you know, that's why we are as a group trying to work on this in the future. You know, so something like this will never
I think this is essential, of course, but very different in the British context, isn't it? Because you as Poles, you're not kind of on the right side of the kind of, you're not the kind of hip kind of minority. You know, there are certain groups who are more highly favoured than others.
classes.
Yes, and partly because this documentary expresses this. Polish people, okay, but yeah, they're a bit racist and backward. That's a long, hard battle to change this.
You see, the only way to change this is from the position of power.
Yeah.
This is with British society, from the position of power, and from the top.
Yeah. I think so.
But also the problem is that I told you about the positive opinions of some Jewish people in Poland, but the leading journalist in Poland, Mr. Tomasz Lis, said that the documentary film showed the whole truth. That was his reaction. So I'm really ashamed when I hear from Polish people opinions like that, and they are treated like hell. They should be.
But isn't this part of the process of trying to prove his credential, be more like them, be more like the civilised Westerners? There's something of that going on, isn't there? You have to repudiate your own culture in order to be accepted as a really modern, sophisticated person. And I think that's a very big part of the problem. You can't somehow be both. What I noticed in Britain, as this has happened over the last few decades, it involves a lot of repudiation, it involves a lot of attacking your own society in order to prove your credentials on the other side. So those, yeah, you know what I mean.
I'd like to also add that this Christmas, this culture of like promoting this open-minded, so it's some sort of paradox, because on the other hand, they say that promotes open-minded culture, but on the other hand, actually, the narrow-minded. So it's just like huge paradox.
Yeah, I think so.
It's not only British people narrow-minded, we are as well. Polish society, I think that we are.
They say that they are divided, but like when you actually look at what they do, what they say, it's actually
well, people never said to you that we are narrow-minded. They always said that it's open-minded. It's like one of the slogans from your CV. I'm open-minded, I'm flexible, I'm confident. That's just what everybody said. That meaning of some of the words just lose during the years because they're so expected that you will say to some of the people, some of the words that they just lost the meaning. So like, when I came first to England, I was so lovely that everybody asked me, how are you? But that doesn't mean anything. There's just a few people which really ask you and really want to know, how are you? How you are? And what do you think? And, oh, I love you. What's that? It's just within the meaning, and I think that it's just, yeah, we have to look about the reason why it's like this, but just argue about the name of the word. There's no point.
So what do you suggest we should do as a group, professional group here? What are your, what would be your...
I don't know if I have any. I think you've already said it seems to me the closest that you can come is that Britain is in a funny way kind of a small country with the institutions that are in power. It's a country of institutions historically, where people kind of maybe changing now, but historically have kind of listened to and been very influenced by their institutions. I think if you look at what's happened, let's say in the last 30 years, you see that the people who wanted to present an alternative view to the imperial British traditional one have all worked very hard to get good positions in the institutions, the education, political system, and the media. And in this way, I think the kind of this change of atmosphere, change of values in Britain has been led by people who were very dedicated and determined to get themselves in a position of authority, which you've already said. In this way, we've seen a transformation, I think, of what looks like in public culture, a sort of transformation of the values of the society. I'm not sure how complete it is, but it looks like if you can become influential, yeah, you know what I mean. People get what they want in Britain as well by kind of forming into organisations, networks, and lobbying, putting pressure on the people that matter, the advantage of their own interests. It's lobbying, it's a lobbying and pressure-based system. You have to become visible, you have to keep on and keep on and keep on and keep on. You find out the people to pressurise and pester, and the interests to make an inroad into and do that. That's what other groups have done.
It's what other minorities.
Yes. That's what we do. You form organisations and you start finding the pressure points that will get you increasing influence. And in a way, Britain is quite open to that, or has been, for some groups. There is some democracy. I mean, we don't want to make it sound too shattered. It's kind of, it's still a country, I think, in which you can, I don't know, have some influence if you play politics in the way it's played. You know, pressure politics, interest group politics. But writing letters to the Daily Mail or whatever is a waste of time, for sure. And maybe another thing might change, which is the other thing which we shouldn't forget, is that many people come here now from Britain. I think it's it's quite a mixed picture, actually, because I don't know how many people come to Britain, come to Poland, but almost everybody I know, when they actually come here, forms a favour that likes it. They come to Krakow, but you can't go wrong. They are very often pleasantly surprised because it's not quite like the stereotype, and they find that they have a nice time here and everything seems fine. So there must be more and more of such people. I mean, we have a big problem, though. It was a problem, now it's just a feature of the city of Krakow with these big groups of guys, beer drinking guys, beer monsters coming to stag weekends. They're still there all the time, but the city is always filled with quietly spoken, middle-class English people. You don't hear them, you don't notice them. But there are many thousands of people coming here all the time, and they take home with them an impression of Polish people which must be very different from what the BBC is trying to sell them. One thing which I think would be interesting is in the longer term, if certain British people who perhaps develop an interest in Poland because they've been here or have Polish friends, might start to kind of develop pro-Polish sympathies. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be one thing to try and encourage. Because British people do that. They do, if they take an interest in some other culture, some of them, and a minority of them, actually takes it quite seriously, I find. And become interested in history, culture, literature, music, or whatever. And I would think finding British friends and sort of allies might be important. I don't know how advanced the possibility of that is myself. There are open-minded and generous people in Britain, I'm sure. Maybe you don't think so.
Another question?
Yeah, just one question. Do you think that BBC propaganda had like more economic side, that someone prefer British people to stay in England that might be a local part than to stay abroad?
No, I wouldn't think so. I would. It doesn't sound like it's very likely to me. Not really. I mean, people haven't got any money anyway, as far as I'm concerned. Compared to what they had, what I've noticed since the recession is that all the people I used to know who had lots of money now nobody has any money. So I think the number of holidays are. I don't know the answer to this question. Could be. That would need to think about the BBC in quite a conspiracy theoretical, which it might not be a bad way to think about the BBC being part of conspiracy theory, but conspiracy. But yeah, there's the Olympics. The Olympics will. Here's I think the funny thing on that. I think the Olympics in many ways will be a kind of disaster in Britain. I think they haven't organised it very well, and it will be disorganised. And there was a story yesterday that they haven't got enough security guards. They've had to bring the army in. A lot of the security guards they do have to speak English. They're already doing that. So I think the kind of British, the pessimistic side of Britain, the British people, is all ready for the whole thing to be a complete disaster. Which is another thing. And then there was the terrorism thing. Yeah, it was a competition, I suppose. They were competing for. I'm not sure the kind of people that follow England to football tournaments are the same people that are very enthusiastic about the Olympics necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you will stay with us for dinner, so we can discuss after. Thank you very much, and I think we can